I'm going to get started with our introductions. So welcome. We are so excited that you are here today. My name is Maddie Duke, and on behalf of ABA Technologies, thank you so much for being here. At ABA Technologies, we partner with small and medium-sized organizations to solve real performance problems. We do this by helping organizations build better training systems and by ensuring those systems actually translate into meaningful behavior change on the job. In the context of today's webinar, we'll be focusing on RBT professional development and improving your technician's measurement skills. I'm very excited to introduce today's presenters. First, Danielle LaFrance is our customer success manager, and she brings over 23 years of experience working with individuals with developmental disabilities and a decade of leadership experience in behavior analytics service organizations. Danielle has led clinical teams, developed scalable service delivery systems, and mentored dozens of future BCBAs through internship programs that she helped establish. Her professional interests include verbal behavior, generative programming, discrimination, and staff training, and she is deeply committed to the science of behavior analysis. Danielle has contributed extensively to the field through research, publications, conference presentations, and editorial service, and she's been recognized with multiple awards for her clinical supervision and scholarly work. Joining her is Adam Hockman, Senior Vice President of Learning Partnerships and Growth at ABA Technologies. Adam is an instructional designer who specializes in building learning and performance systems that improve professional practice. He plays a key role in developing corporate training programs and educational technologies, drawing on experience across private education settings and specialized healthcare environments. Adam's work focuses on bridging the gap between training and real-world performance. We're excited to have both of them with us today. And without further delay, let's get started.
Great. Thanks so much, Maddie, and welcome everyone to our February webinar. This is part of a series of webinars that we're doing focused on the professional development requirement for RBTs. Of course, that applies beyond RBTs. It could be anyone that's on the front line that's working with clients in any behavior analytics setting. And we're going to focus today on measurement. Last time we talked about professionalism and professional conduct skills. In upcoming webinars, we're going to talk about areas like verbal behavior, prompting, get into the weeds of the content. What do people need to learn? What do you need to train? How do you meet the 40-hour and PDU requirement from the BACB? And we're also going to talk about training tactics. If you've been to our previous webinars, we are happy to welcome you back, and you can go back and look at our YouTube page and search ABA Technologies, and you can find all the previous webinars, especially if you are new to the area of training in ABA, or if you're having oversight over a training program. We encourage you to go back and look at our webinars on assessment, BACB requirements, common pitfalls in training, and then as well as our PDU series that we've started. We're really excited today. Just like an hour ago, we sent out the launch email for our upcoming clinical leaders community, which will officially launch on April 1. I know we've been talking about this for a while, but we're going to officially launch it on April 1. Maddie's going to put a link in the chat so that if you'd like to learn about the clinical leaders community, if you want us to contact you specifically when it goes live, we'll do that. But over the course of March, we're going to feature 4 pre-launch events to get you exposed to the kinds of things that will happen in the community. The community is really intended to be a dedicated space, a virtual space for people who are responsible for training, supervision, and performance systems. That could be someone who's a training director and spends a lot of their time working on the technician end. It could be someone who's training or doing mentorship with BCBAs. It could be a chief clinical officer. It could be a non-BCBA role, like a trainer, someone that's RBT certified and they conduct trainings, or it could be someone who's maybe more on the compliance end. We're going to talk about the range of learning and development, everything from learning management system administration to reporting to instructional design, delivering training, evaluation, looking at outcomes across the organization, how that relates to performance outcomes for the client or for the technician or the person you're training, as well as performance outcomes for the clients. And so we're going to have a number of live events in the community. We're also going to have resources that are exclusive to the community, like podcasts, Q&A. You'll be able to ask questions of us, people who do training and go into organizations and work on performance improvement all the time, as well as from one another. In March, we're going to start 4 pre-launch events, March 5th, 9th, 18th, and 25th. And this will give you an idea of how we plan to structure the rest of the community. On the 5th, we're going to do it won't be a webinar format. You'll be able to see other participants. You'll be able to raise your hand, ask questions. We'll have you jump in. We're going to show you how to use journey mapping as a technique to look at the candidate's journey. So you've got a new tech, they find a job on your web page or on Indeed, they come and do the interview. We're going to look at how to map out that whole experience, align it with a learner journey, meaning once they come into the organization and they're participating in training, what does that experience look like for them? Journey mapping is a great way to look at designing a robust and streamlined experience for new hires. And we're also going to use journey mapping to kind of do what we would do in OBM, like an is map and a should map when it comes to process mapping. We're going to look at things that are not ideal, that are contributing to a bad experience or subpar experience in the onboarding time, and then ways that we can make minor changes, everything from things we do with tech platforms to things that we say and do during those initial contacts. So we're going to do an open session. You're going to watch us use a tool called Mural to create a journey map, look at differences in journey mapping. Then the second one of the things we're going to do in the community is interview a lot of outside leaders and researchers and clinicians. And on March 9th, we're going to have a conversation with Dr. Kayla Randall from Georgia Southern University. We're going to talk about the concurrent operant assessment, which is not super well known to a lot of practitioners, but it is really useful, especially if you're not running FAA conditions in your organization. So we're going to talk, she's such a COA expert, and she wrote a really great tutorial last year on it. And so we're going to apply COA, concurrent operant assessment, to a fictional case. And then her and I are going to dialogue back and forth about ways that you would train people to do COAs, where you could fit it into your clinic. And we're going to talk about COAs as they are relevant to a lot of the settings we think you're in. So early intervention settings, school age clinics, home settings, a lot of the COA literature has been pushed toward the classroom setting. So we're going to talk about it in the clinical ABA environment. Then March 18th, we're going to do a 90-minute workshop. You're going to come, if you attend this event, it's going to be a live workshop where you can bring a piece of training that maybe you want to improve the active participation in. And we're going to do a deep dive into active participation strategies. We're going to have a piece of training that we're going to modify during the session. You can ask questions and then try it out on your own. And then the last session is going to be a question and answer session about training digital data collection platforms and other kinds of systems training. We know sometimes the organizations we've worked with have anywhere from 3 to upwards of 20 different platforms that technicians have to interact with. And there are a lot of considerations when you go to train a tech system. And so we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about integrations. We're going to talk about where there are disconnects in training. So I hope you'll enjoy. All of these events are free. We hope you'll join them, and then it'll give you enough of a taste you can decide whether the community is for you or not. Like I said, the series of webinars that we're doing over the next several months are about the professional development requirement. We started with professionalism and professional conduct, but we're moving our way through different topic areas that we see from people and people come to us for on doing advanced training, like some of the ones you see here on screen. We have a whole ProTech product. It's built so that you can take a team of technicians, you can give them little bits of online learning, then you use our supervisor and learner workbook. You give them performance tasks that they can try out in the clinic. You're giving them feedback. You're coming back to supervision meetings. You're having discussion about it. It's a way to really get into the flow of work, professional development on some of the key clinical areas. And so here on screen, you can get a snapshot of some of the different modules and lessons that are in our ProTech product. I hope you'll, in our follow-up email, take some time off my calendar or someone from our sales team to talk about that if that's of interest to you. So today we're talking about data collection and measurement skills. Danielle's going to go into some of the very specifics about the content, the requirements of training measurement, some things that you probably know or you should know if you're doing training, and things that maybe you want to revisit a little bit. And then I'm going to move into some of the considerations of training. So we'll actually go through some different training strategies, things you can do when you're actually running an instructor-led training that you're where you're training, let's say frequency or rate or partial interval recording. All right. So Danielle's going to start here and first talk about our broad training goals when it comes to measurement.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, everyone, for being here. As Adam said, we're going to come back up a little bit and talk about some broad training goals first, or some of the main takeaways we might impart when training new technicians on measurement and measurement skills. So the first is likely around helping new technicians understand the importance of measurement and data collection. And what I mean by that is its relationship to clients' treatment outcomes. That's really the big thing, right? The big picture. And this might include educating them on the reasons we measure behavior, and more specifically, how the data we collect allow us to determine the effectiveness of our interventions. Pardon me, I'm a little bit congested and have a little bit of a cold, so you'll have to forgive me. Additionally, this is likely to include orienting them to how we evaluate data and make those clinical decisions based on these data. So kind of giving them that broader context of why the data that they collect on a day-to-day basis really matters. Finally, this should also involve teaching them how measurement, more broadly speaking, allows us to assess client progress overall. The second is pretty obvious, and that's teaching new technicians about what we measure, the ways we measure, and how to collect data accordingly. And we'll delve into that in a lot more detail shortly. Finally, the third area is likely focused on the importance of integrity, both with respect to treatment implementation and data. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So we'll dig into each in a little bit more detail next, and then we'll circle back around to these big ideas and we talk about considerations and common challenges. So we can put this into perspective of how to plan for and then train effectively for all of these skills in a way that really sticks. So with respect to treatment outcomes, the first point we might want to emphasize is how measurement and data collection allows us to ensure our interventions are effective and the ways that we do this. I think that here it's important for technicians to understand the importance of getting baseline data. And this can be in the context of assessment, reassessment, or ongoing skills teaching and behavior intervention plans. Regardless of the context, though, I think the point to make is that baseline provides us with a point of comparison against which to measure the effects of our interventions. In the case of assessment and reassessment, this is more broad, right? We're really looking at a client's current skill levels across developmental domains. In the case of skills teaching, this provides us with a snapshot of where a client's skills lie, telling us what targets need to be taught versus which might already have been learned, whether incidentally or via some other means. This is where I often see a big miss, especially in skill acquisition. Baseline data are rarely collected prior to teaching new targets within a lesson, but it's critically important to do so to ensure we don't waste precious treatment time. Finally, in the case of interventions focused on behavior reduction, this provides us with a starting point to determine current levels, trends, and variability, and then we use that information to make decisions as to when an intervention should be implemented. Once we have those baselines established, we can monitor the effects of our interventions following their implementation to see whether they're having the desired impact. In the case of skills teaching, we should see pretty steep upward trends. Over time, we should also see some evidence of learning set, meaning that the time it takes to master a certain target or set of targets should progressively decrease with each new response or skill taught. In the case of behavior reduction, the opposite is true. We should see decreasing trends. So in other words, what we really want our technicians to understand is that ongoing data collection permits us to track behavior change whenever we're collecting these data. And collectively, this allows us to evaluate the overall effectiveness of our interventions and then make changes according to what the data tell us. And this is the basis upon which we make our clinical decisions. Evaluation of the data allows us to adjust our approach in incremental ways until we see that our interventions are having the intended and desired effects. This is an iterative and ongoing process, which allows us to maximize services and outcomes. And I really think that this point is probably not shared or articulated very well with a lot of our technicians. A lot of our technicians don't understand this. So I think it's important to emphasize that without data, we can't make decisions. And if we can't make decisions, then we can't be effective. Bottom line, if we're not constantly collecting and then evaluating data, then we're not doing applied behavior analysis, right? It's the cornerstone of what we do. Relatedly, our ongoing data collection and evaluation of those data allow us to determine progress toward broader client programming and goals. Each technician's day-to-day activities and their ability to carry out these responsibilities accurately and reliably significantly impacts our ability to summarize client progress and treatment plans. And then based on this progress, determine what the course of treatment will look like for the next treatment period. So this, I think, would help us to impart to technicians to focus on the forest and not just the trees, right? There are much broader impacts to these data we're asking to collect every minute of every day. As BCBAs, we compare these assessment results across treatment periods and then evaluate the progress made toward each of the goals included in the client's treatment plan. Additionally, summarizing client progress in treatment plans keeps us accountable to our clients, their families, and our funding sources. Although none of these tasks are a technician's responsibility, I think it is important for them to understand this impact, as well as the fact that the work that they do is critically important to these efforts. At times, I think it's really easy for technicians to get mired in the day-to-day. So understanding the role they play within the context of their entire team can help them remember the big picture and the importance of their work. All right, now let's talk about our second broad training goal in this area, teaching technicians about measurement and data collection. I know it's obvious given the focus of today's webinar, but there's a lot to it, especially if we take the perspective of a new technician. As BCBAs, measurement and data collection are our bread and butter. Our ability to do this and to do this really, really well distinguishes us from other professions, and we're known for it. So let me illustrate this with kind of a funny anecdote and example. Several years ago, I have a good friend who's an ornithologist, and she invited me to go hummingbirding with her. And I was extremely excited because I absolutely adore hummingbirds. And what this entailed was driving out in the country about an hour before the crack of dawn, setting up hummingbird traps. And then what the ornithologists were doing was gently removing the hummingbirds from the traps and then weighing and measuring them and evaluating their overall health, looking at any sorts of diseases within the area, their migratory patterns, etc. And so there's a lot of data collection that goes into it. And I was just so thrilled to be there and to be interacting with hummingbirds. But I was also feeling like a little bit like a fish out of water. And so I approached the main researcher, Dr. Lisa Tell, and I asked her, how can I assist? And she said, oh, will you take data? And I knew, I was like, oh, this is where I can shine. And so I asked her what sort of data she was looking to collect, created a data sheet on the spot, and collected some extremely detailed data. And about an hour into this experience, her ornithologists were feeding her the data sheets after they were completed. She came and pulled me aside and said, what is it that you do? And I said, I'm a behavior analyst. And she was like, this is why your data is so good. So you can see, even an ornithologist, right, knows behavior analysts are trained in data. This is what we are known for. This is what we are so, so good at. Okay, but from the perspective of a new technician, taking it back to our new technicians, there's a lot of brand new stuff to learn in this area. For us, this is old hat, right? But let's look at it. With respect to indirect data alone, common types of measurement we might want to orient them to include permanent products, rating scales, questionnaires, and interviews. Now let's think about direct measures. The list probably includes things like frequency, duration, rate, latency, IRT, intensity, percentage of opportunity, accuracy, and even narrative or topography. Add to that time sampling data collection methods, and the list grows to include whole and partial interval, momentary time sampling, and maybe even play checks. This is a tremendous amount of new information for someone who's brand new to our fields to have to digest. And on top of knowing what each of these measurement systems is, We require technicians to also collect data constantly across multiple different measurement systems, some of which may have variations based on client needs, and to do so proficiently and accurately. Which brings me to our third broad training goal, the importance and impact of integrity, both with respect to data and implementation. Technicians need to know how important it is to collect data with integrity, meaning it is accurate and reliable. Here, I think it's important to orient them to how this will be measured, such as through IOA checks. They also need to know how to maintain the integrity of client data, meaning how to keep it safe and confidential, especially if they're going to be involved in storing or transporting data. And here, I think it's important that they understand the implications of not maintaining data integrity and how this relates to our codes of ethics, theirs and ours. In addition, and still related to integrity, technicians need to understand the importance of treatment integrity. And this is also often referred to as treatment fidelity, procedural integrity, or procedural fidelity. Because this has a direct impact on our ability to evaluate the effectiveness of our interventions and client progress, technicians should expect that treatment implementation will be measured, how and when this will be done, and that treatment integrity scores will be evaluated and then used to determine ongoing training goals, areas of focus, and supports. And that this, just like any other data collection measurement system, is an iterative and ongoing process. All right. Now let's talk about considerations when planning to train the skills we just talked about. That was a lot, right? As with all the skills we teach our new technicians, we want to make sure we train with efficacy, meaning they exit training and can actually perform the skills on the job. We also want to make sure that we train with efficiency, meaning that we're doing so in the least amount of time possible so that our technicians can start working with clients and getting those billable hours. And we want to make sure that we train with maintenance in mind, meaning that when we train, it needs to then stick. In addition, we also have to carefully consider how we're meeting BCBA requirements in training. Zooming in on some of these requirements, the most obvious area of overlap with today's focus is content area C, data collection and graphing. However, there are also code items in content areas F and G that also pertain to measurement and data collection. I've already touched on some of the ways these skills are related to service documentation and reporting, but another consideration that might best fall into content area G pertains to data storage, right? I mentioned that with data integrity, transportation, if applicable, and protecting client confidentiality. And we have to cover the content itself. I've called up this visual again because look at the sheer amount of measures we are fluent with, and we expect our new technicians to become fluent with too. We absolutely can't expect this without careful training that includes lots of definition, examples and non-examples, and practice. So, to make sure we cover all the requirements, as well as guarantee that training is effective, efficient, and sticks, training needs to be designed in a way that is standardized and replicable. When expectations are clear, then training performance expectations can be aligned, and systems, broader systems, can be created in such a way that they will also support the skills you train beyond the scope of initial onboarding. So training should also be approached with an eye to quality, and Adam did a little bit of foreshadowing here when he talked about learner journeys. This is a little bit of an example of what a journey might look like. And this visual, which I pulled from our ProTech course on measurement data collection, represents a really nice way of planning a learner journey in this particular skill area. You can see here that the content is carefully scoped and sequenced, and within each of the lessons that you see enumerated on the visual, there's lots of active student responding and practice. Adam will talk a little bit more about what good training should look like momentarily. And just like I did in our webinar last month, I would argue that when training is done well, or what's really well planned, and it hits all of those notes I previously mentioned, then it allows us to avoid or at least minimize a lot of the common challenges our new technicians are likely to encounter. And here's an example of just one of those common issues, poor IOA, right? If we're not conducting these IOA checks frequently, we might not catch this issue. But this has the potential to have a huge negative impact on our data, our subsequent decision-making based on those data, and ultimately client progress. So we need to have systems that prompt us to conduct those IOA checks frequently and then take actionable steps to remediate these issues. But this also means that we need to train to accuracy and fluency when we're initially training our technicians. And here are some additional challenges we see commonly arise. I like this visual, and again, I pulled it from that same ProTech lesson on measurement data collection because it outlines not only some of the problems, but also some of the solutions to these problems. And you can see a lot of them are more systems related. But here again, training should account for these common challenges and serve to inoculate against them by ensuring lots of examples and non-examples, active student responding, practice, and feedback. So I'll pass it off to Adam at this point so he can share his expert insights on how to set out training and accomplish these aims.
Great. Thanks, Danielle. So you brought up a lot of the content of what's getting taught and the skills that you're going to be shaping in training and on the job. And we're now going to look at some of the considerations and strategies you might think about. These are probably things you're already doing to some extent, but things that maybe in certain areas of measurement you want to clean up in your instructional delivery. We may not get to all of these in our remaining time together, but we'll kind of move through them. The first one is really a consideration around training, data collection, and measurement. And we've seen this happen in several different ways. Some organizations will have people go through an online module on data collection, and then they will go right on the job, and a more senior technician will then provide them with coaching on how to use the measurement skills they learned in the module, how to do that in the digital data collection platform with a client. Okay, really in situ teaching of data collection. And that presents a lot of challenges because the delivery then becomes dependent on the quality of the instruction and the practice and the feedback of that individual technician. The other thing that we've seen is that people will start with paper-based data collection, and then they'll move to a digital data collection platform. And that's really what I'm going to advocate for today. And then we've seen where people put people on a digital platform immediately. So their measurement training, when they come to an instructor-led training, if it's 3, 4, 5 hours on measurement, they come and they immediately get put on a tablet, and then they start doing digital data collection. There are several reasons for us to advocate for starting with paper pencil. The first is that you can't count those hours where you're doing tech setup, and there's often a lot of tech setup when you do systems training. If you don't have people already working inside of the apps they're going to be using in the organization, the first time they come to data collection training, it might be the first 30, 45 hour of the session that you're going to be focused on just getting people logged in, removing errors. You might be doing hand-me-down tablets, so there are issues with the tablet and you don't know that until you've got a bunch of trainees in the room, or you're spending most of your time fixing it one-on-one with people. And that really impedes the kind of experience people are having in training, as well as spending a lot of time doing setup that don't count toward the 40 hours, because data collection training, the 3 hours on data collection in the curriculum outline, come from active data collection and measurement training, not system setup. Okay, so that's one reason. The second is that there are a lot of component skills that you're teaching when you're doing data collection training. Not only are you teaching what is frequency, what is rate, how do you count it, how do you time it, but you're also teaching component skills like visually scanning, being able to look at the observational field for what you're looking at related to an operational definition, and then bouncing back and forth between looking up here and then looking down at my tablet, either to click buttons or looking at paper data collection, or maybe you have technicians who are wearing, golf counters around their belt loops, and so they're counting maybe challenging behavior on that. So there are a lot of skills of just navigating the work of measurement that need to get trained and practiced before we get into the meat of actually looking at when the response cycle starts and ends for whatever target behavior we're tracking. So paper data collection allows you to do that. As a trainer, it puts a permanent product in front of you to see when people start and stop, and they mark on their data sheet or they start and stop with their timer. Whereas many data collection systems have a fine interface where it's got big buttons for a plus, a minus, a prompt, whatever it might be, but it's not super clear. You'd have to go into the data log, you'd have to go into the graph to see what gets recorded. So by starting with paper, you get to spend a lot more time providing immediate feedback, and also knowing that if you put the screen in front of someone, They're going to be people who need an opportunity to just orient to the organization of the tablet, holding the tablet, all of the features, the pop-ups, clicking into different menus and so forth. So it's really hard to control. And from a standardization of training perspective, it's difficult because as you start using a digital data collection system, even if you have fictional dummy accounts, oftentimes those data that they're inputting are then going to affect the graph. So if you're inputting a lot of data and they're making a lot of errors, and then you want to control your training to go to another exercise where now they're going to look at those data on the graph and they're going to make a prediction about what might happen or whether they need to, whether the target's moving in the therapeutic direction or not, it creates a lot of variability that you can't really control for as a trainer. And we know that a lot of people deliver training by using other technicians to deliver training. They assist with the training. And so in that way, it puts a lot of weight on the trainee or on the trainer to come up with in the moment decisions. And then you can't really have a good use case for what you're trying to demonstrate. So there are a lot of challenges in that way as well. The other thing that can happen is that when you train immediately on data collection, digital platforms, people can become overly reliant on prompts and cues that are in the app. And as AI has been more integrated into data collection platforms, there are more potentially helpful prompts and cues that are in there, but they can also distract you from the very thing that you need to be doing, which is observing and then marking data. Okay. So there's a disconnect that can happen. So we really advocate that your upfront data collection training happens. You may do 2 hours of data collection training that's in person, paper, pencil. It's live, so you can do demonstration, you can give feedback, you can walk around and monitor what trainees are doing. Then you have a system setup kind of session, whether that's with an IT person or whether it's a separate session. Then you come back and you use that remaining hour of data collection training to actually get into a fictional profile, start to control some of the examples that you're going to present. And then that way, you know that they have the prerequisite skills before they get into the digital platform. The second piece, which is related to more designing your training on data collection, but something that you should think about more broadly is the integration of procedural fidelity tools. So often we see that people either they don't do procedural fidelity at all, they do it infrequently, they have procedural fidelity checklists that have 60 items for a single discrete trial. Good luck to them to try to even figure out how to code all of that for a single trial. If they can code all of that live for a single trial, then your trials are being delivered too slowly. So there are a lot of issues with the ways people create procedural fidelity tools. But we often see that when people are using PF tools, they're doing it by using it as an evaluation or a coaching tool rather than a self-monitoring mechanism for the trainee. So if you've got a bunch of different procedural fidelity tools on how to collect data, how to implement a discrete trial, how to implement a preference assessment, naturalistic teaching procedures, use those early in your data collection training, embed them through all your training. That first day that someone comes to a training session, have some sort of something that would mimic a procedural fidelity checklist for, am I ready for training? Do I have all the materials that I need for training? When I'm going out and doing an observation, do I have all those materials? Starting to integrate these tools and having learners actually fill them out themselves gets them to start attending to the right cues. One of the big problems with having people go out in the clinic and do shadowing at different points in their training is that they're not always attending to the things that they should be attending to. I remember one time delivering a training with a group of trainees, and we sent the technicians out in the clinic and they had these little worksheets, but we didn't do a lot of priming for them to get out there. And they come back and I asked one trainee, okay, so what did you see? I'm thinking, oh, wow, I saw them implement some really cool verbal behavior program. They had to do some behavior management. It was really cool. We saw them in a naturalistic setting. We saw them in the table. And the whole thing that the training came back and talked to me about was, I really don't think she likes, what she had packed in her lunch. And, she talked a lot about, what she ate during snack time. She was like she had never seen some of the materials that were being used. She was asking me questions about like how the cards got laminated and, how did they organize that? And where did the toys come from? What kind of toys? All great questions, but completely irrelevant to the shadowing session. I wanted you to go in for this 1 hour and I wanted you to see someone implementing trials, and you didn't attend to that at all. You attended to all of these irrelevant features for the goal of that observation or that shadow. So by using these tools up front, it gets people to start better reading protocols, reading operational definitions, starting to think about their own behaviors. So they start thinking about the interlocking contingencies that my behavior is going to affect the contingencies of the learners, and the same is going to be for me. And they can start thinking about that relationship. So adding in these tools up front and having people code in basic ways. Yes, I did it. No, I didn't. Then more sophisticated ways, tallying, calculating rate, doing duration, doing interval recording. Those are all ways to start building those tools into the thread of training so that when you get to measurement, it isn't so abrupt that now I'm observing and collecting information and summarizing it. Claire St. Peter at West Virginia University, if you search her lab page, and we'll put this in our follow-up email, she's one of the queens of procedural fidelity, has done a lot of the research on it, has looked at provider perceptions, researchers' perceptions on procedural fidelity. Her lab website has this huge trunk of procedural fidelity tools, things that they've collected from the research literature, things they've created on their own, things that I think providers have submitted to them. If you search the website, they're all freely available in Dropbox there. I pulled 2 examples from that. But I would start there to look at some of the examples of how you can strip down procedural fidelity checklists so that they are focused on the very things that are going to make the most different for the client outcome, and then create tailored versions so that you can do the same with technicians. This idea of having people code, both do in more of a self-monitoring perspective, but then also being able to code things that they're observing, code sessions, is things that people have studied. This Rosales et al. Article, they looked at having undergrads, they would watch a picture exchange communication system session. They have them watch this PEC session, and they taught them this coding taxonomy, and they would code correct and incorrect responses from the implementer. They had not implemented PECs before. So they went through a training progression where they did a lot of coding of other people's behavior. So now we're adding an active participation into observational learning. And then they had them go and implement in a role play setting PEC's implementation of what they had observed. Okay. So they actually didn't do any direct training on teaching the PEC's implementation, but they did a lot on the observation end. And they saw significant outcomes in terms of being able to implement the things that they were coding. So this is a really great way, especially when you're in training settings where you've got trainees who aren't, offering a whole lot. They're not asking, unprompted questions that they've got or voicing their concerns about what they're doing. This is a way to add something tangible. It's got a permanent product on it. You can use it as a good record that they've been participating during training, but it's also a useful prerequisite tool for getting into then actually collecting data, implementing trials, using behavior management strategies. So I encourage you to look at this article, but also some of the tools that Claire and her colleagues have built. The third piece is that when you are designing data collection training, you want to think about the complexity of the kinds of exemplars that people are recording data on. So in one example, I'll give you a common example that I've seen in clinics. People will have them go through an online module of measurement, and then they'll go on the job with their data collection tablet, or they'll go with a paper data, clipboard with a data sheet, and they'll have them start collecting data on client behavior, okay, which is a very reasonable thing to do because eventually they're going to do that independently. The problem with it is that that doesn't really anchor to the trainee's experience in their proficiency of collecting data. So I may learn what frequency, rate, whole interval recording are in my online module, but then when I go out and sit with a client, if I'm only observing for, let's say, 2 hours, I may never see any instance of problem behavior, which means I never get to practice collecting frequency on aggression. Okay. This particular day, the learner wasn't feeling very good. So the trial counts were down and I didn't really get to collect a whole lot of, percent of opportunity. Okay. So when we put all of our practice effort out there in the field, in the naturalistic context, that's important, but we need to do it after we have certainty that they have established the component skills of collecting data and all the things that that includes to a certain degree, so that we know that when they get out there, they can manage the complexities and that we don't have to rely on them seeing 10 sessions to get what we could compact into a nice, tight instructor-led training. So when you think about giving people practice opportunities, and we're going to use some example videos in just a moment, but when you think about training data collection, think about the sequence within each of the different dimensions that you're training. Think about the complexity that builds over time. So if I'm training frequency, for example, in some of the videos that I use up front, where they're going to practice frequency data collection, it's probably going to be some pretty easy videos. It's very clear what the target behavior is. It's very clear whether it's an example or non-example of that behavior. It's clear what the onset and offset are. There aren't too many instances of the behavior in the clip. The clip's probably not that long because they don't have endurance in being able to collect data. And so I think about all of those features of that exemplar that we're using up front. I want to think about ways that I can dial up and dial back the complexity of that. And that's what this dial board here is meant to represent, is that there are different ways to make it more complex. If I have an easy clip up front, then 6 examples in, I might make it more complex. The clip might be longer, so that now we have to show that you have endurance to collect data accurately over 3 minutes instead of 30-second clips. I might be checking for stability, meaning I might have a clip that's of a client or an actor, and it's in a setting where there's a lot of background distractions. There are other clients that are running in. There are other voices. There's sounds. People are dropping a PEX book on the floor. There are all these other distractions that are going to more mimic what's going to happen in the clinic, and I can have them practice. That's one way of increasing the complexity of the practice situation. I also will think about, regardless of any type of data collection, I'm going to be thinking about IRT, or inter response time. The shorter the IRT, the more complex it is to collect data on, especially when you're using tablet or paper data. Think about duration, the start and stop of an episode. The shorter the amount of time between the end of one episode and the start of the next one, that's more complex than longer periods of time, because I have to start, stop, clear my timer in some cases, or mark my data sheet, or I might be transitioning from looking down and looking up and looking down and looking up. Okay. So we have to think about, how much space is in between instances and episodes. And then there's the concurrency of whatever targets we're looking at. Often in data collection training, we spend a lot of time on tracking data or collecting data on a single target. We don't build to concurrent targets, like what's going to happen in practice, where you're tracking 3 different behavior reduction topographies. They've all got their own different buttons at the bottom of the screen or on a separate data sheet. And I'm also running a teaching session, and I'm collecting trial data. Okay. All those things are happening at once. The topographies of each one are going to look different. The definitions are going to look different. And then you have the complexity of, if in the clinic I'm working, I'm going to work with this client primarily Monday through Friday in the mornings. I've got a different client in the afternoon, but when this tech is out now, I have to jump in. And their definitions and their targets are all going to be different from the person that I'm training on. So it's no wonder that people leave training and they really can't collect data very well. Okay. I mean, if we're surprised that most people leave training and they can't collect it very well, really look at these variables, because it makes a whole lot of sense why they can't easily transition to another client, which has more cascading problems for the business than just data collection accuracy and integrity. Okay. If you can't easily move a technician from one client to another when a tech's out or when there's a client out, then you're in a really vulnerable position. You can't serve those hours. You have to put that person on non-billable time and activities. Okay. So there are a lot of factors that are directly connected to data collection. And then, of course, other procedural skills they're going to be using. Okay. The fourth one is that upfront in training, and I'm talking about instructor-led training, whether this is one-on-one where I'm with another technician, or I've got a class of 3 people that are going through training. before you, again, get them into the tablet where you can't see anything, where all you can see, especially if you're doing this in a group, you can't see every person start, stop. You can't check the accuracy. You can't get an IOA check on all of the folks in the room, because at the point that they've stopped the timer or they've clicked the button, then you'd have to have them go to a data log and you'd have to look at the log and then you'd have to maybe go to the graph. Okay. This creates a lot of headaches. It slows down the training session. It decreases the number of active participation opportunities. So when we're doing paper data collection, and then when we're doing tablet data collection, we want to add in a lot of say and show actions into training. So for example, we're about to watch this new video. In this video, the client is going to engage in vocal protesting. I want you to say aloud, we're going to collect rate data. You're going to say when you start the timer, when you stop the timer, and every time you see an instance of it, I'm going to have you say aloud, mark, 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 mark. Okay. This way, if I've got all my trainees doing that, they're saying and making, very obvious, overt actions that I can see and I can give feedback on, then I know that if I'm 5 seconds or 10 seconds into the video clip and everybody's off, what is the point of continuing to run the rest of the 2-minute clip? Go back, do some correction. Or before you get into that, if you know that that is always the error, do some pre-correction before you get into it. Okay. Adding in these layers of say and show cues eventually then become covert. It's one of the things we talk about in talk aloud problem solving. Okay. If we have them make their thinking aloud overt, then we can shape it. And then it becomes covert. What you established as terminologies, what they were tacting in terms of their own actions in implementing the procedure, then it improves the procedural fidelity. It then improves the data collection, improves any of the other instructional procedures that they're learning to implement. Adding the say and the show cues, it allows you to catch those errors early. It also helps you look for trainees that will fall behind. There are a lot of trainees that fall through the cracks. Okay. When you're only doing data collection on a tablet and you're having them collected on a video or a role play where you're acting in the role play, this is often a very funny one to be. I'm the trainer. I've got 4 trainees. I'm going to do a role play. So I'm engaged in the role play. I'm not monitoring anybody's responding as they're collecting data, okay, which is the whole point of what I should be doing as the trainer. That's why I'm there, okay? But if I don't have these say and show cues in place, I cannot provide immediate feedback. The other thing that can happen is that we can all get to the same end result, but we didn't follow the right process to get there, okay? Data collection happens in a chain, all right? There is a difference between, let me give you a common example I see. This, a technician that's, they're going to game the system. They don't like that you have to start, stop. We used to do training and they would use their, the Apple timer. And they're like, okay, I'm going to game this system. I'm going to start my clock when the first instance starts, or let's say we're taking duration, the beginning of this episode. Then I'm just going to look down and see how much time has elapsed. And then I'll know when the offset was. And I'll look down again and see where the clock's now continuing to run. And so now you have them doing math on top of trying to do observation. So they're like, okay, it's 18 seconds. I write that down. Okay, starting at 22. Okay, it went to 44. Now I subtract it. Okay, they're writing it down. All right, you can see all those kinds of things happening. And then all you're looking at is the result of that entire exercise. And on the other end of them, maybe they got to the right, the right answer. But then the problem is that they followed the completely wrong chain that will really mess with them when they're starting to do this in practice. Okay. So I have seen this where people will start a timer. Let's say we're doing rate data, start a timer. They'll mark, 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 mark. Video ends. They'll just look down at the timer to see where it ended. They'll record that time. Then they'll summarize. In the moment when they're summarizing, they're counting the number of tally marks. They've forgotten what the duration was. Okay. So you see these errors that start to pop up, and not always when you're doing training can you see that they didn't follow the right chain. Okay. And then you start having chaining issues that are going on. And then that's when people, this just starts to cascade. People start thinking they're going to remember how many trials the learner got correct during a teaching session, and then they're going to track that later. The number of times, I remember this very distinctly, doing an observation of a tech. She had her tablet. She pulled up the program. She reviewed what she was going to run in the teaching session. She put it over her tablet over on the side. She goes over and she runs a session for like 10 minutes. I'm like, oh, this is going to be so interesting. What will she record when she comes back to the tablet? Because she's done about 25 different things. There have been like 10 different episodes of challenging behavior in this 10 minutes. What could she possibly come back and record? And I'm thinking she's going to open up and she's going to record aggression and she's going to record SIB and she's going to record trials across different programs. She came over and clicked one button on the tablet for that entire 10 minutes of teaching. Okay. So this starts up front in training. If you don't send these messages up front in training that there is a clear chain to follow, we're going to follow that chain. If you make errors, you don't record it, you report it. Okay. All of those kinds of good skills that we want people to develop. When we're frustrated that people aren't doing that on the job, we have never really solidified that for them during training. And using say, show cues, talking about these kinds of things, setting up these these little fires that they can practice navigating during training will much better serve them and you as the supervisor and the client once they're on the job. Okay. So let me just show you a brief example of what this could look like. We've got a video here. We're going to collect frequency on vocal protesting. Right here, we've got the therapist. Right here, we've got the learner. And if I were doing this in training, it was one of the first examples I was going to show, or maybe the second one. This is what it would look like. All right, everybody, we're going to go through this example here. Anytime you see vocal protesting, I want you to say mark, okay, or count aloud. Here we go.
It's time to clean up.
No.
Count.
There you go.
No.
Count.
Clean up. Clean up like this.
No.
Count.
Nice job.
No.
Count. Okay, and I would continue through the clip. Now, this tells me some information. Go ahead and in the chat, if you can write it here, what kind of information could this give me that maybe I wouldn't see if they were just doing it in a digital platform or if they were just tallying on their data sheet? And I'm up at the front of the room, controlling the computer, clicking on and off the video. What are some of the things I could see as the trainer? Some of the things that it could tell me if I were having them say, count aloud as a group. The timing for data collection, excellent. Yes. Okay. That's a great one because what we might see is we've got 3 trainees. 2 of them are on the ball. Behavior happens, count. Behavior, count. Behavior, count. Then we've got other people who are behavior, count. Or now they're a little confused, okay, about what they're seeing. Any other ideas of what this could tell us? There are 2 concurrent behaviors going on in this video. Vocal protesting and putting that block in the container. What I could see is that someone starts to get confused about what they're tracking. And this doesn't happen so much at the beginning of a training session as it does as you're working through the training and you've offered a lot of operational definitions and you've reused videos. Okay. So now they start saying count when she's putting the block in the container. And I can say, wait. That's not the target behavior. The target behavior is vocal protesting. Let's retry that. Okay. So I can look a lot at the immediacy of doing it. I can look a lot at whether or not they are tracking the right behavior in there. I can also test whether someone else put in here, whether they know the operational definition. Absolutely. Those are some of the things that I can make sure are happening before I put all my weight into, oh yeah, they're ready to go out there. Yeah, let's go have them collect data and try to do IOA with another technician. Okay. So that's one of the things. It's very easy to already take what you're doing at the beginning, you're already doing in training, and just overlaying that piece of it that'll give you a lot of information. It can also be helpful when you have people who are already on the job and they're struggling with data collection and you don't really trust what they're recording. You can go back and can kind of reverse scaffold. Now you were fully released to do this on your own. Now we're going to go back and try it where I'm going to have you give those show and say cues. Okay. All right. Related to that, sometimes one of the challenges of data collection, except for when it's permanent product data collection, is that there's no visual left behind of what's happening except for the data that you collect, which is great when your data are accurate, but not so great when they aren't accurate. Okay. And great when it's a video that you can replay, and not so great when it's live and we can't replay it. Okay. So this is when we see people start slipping into, I'm going to rely on my memory. Okay. I would never collect any data correctly if I were relying on my memory. Okay. So one of the ways to show this, and you can do this both as an exercise, similar to say and show on top of a video, is doing it with a visualization like this. Start your timer, end, track. Okay. Or put it in your tablet. Start your timer, stop, record. Start, stop, record. Okay. You can either use this as a visual way to break it down for people that can't track the video, which can be very helpful for learners that don't have a history of really being able to pay attention to video demonstrations and recording information about them. It can also be a way to summarize what just happened. In this video we just watched, this is what you observed. There was an instance of the behavior, there was a little episode right here, and then you recorded it. See how there was longer time before you had to be ready to do it again. Now look at this one. This was really short. Look at that IRT from the end of the behavior to the next one. You have to be really quick. If you missed it, it's because you didn't expect that it was going to happen again. Okay. So that's one of the things that adding a visualization as a summary to data collection, also doing it as an exercise on the board. I've seen people where they use different cues on like a whiteboard as the video's playing. Can be a really great way to get them thinking about, what about the immediacy of data collection, all of the different kinds of behaviors that I need to manage as I'm going through my data collection. Okay. All right. Now we have run out of time. So I will not be able to go through the last three strategies on here on what you can do in terms of strengthening operational definition reading, how you can use some coaching strategies from parent-child interaction therapy to really shape up in the moment. But the last factor I'm going to talk about here, jump to 7, are some things related to platform training. Okay, and we're going to get into this in one of our upcoming community pre-launch events. We're going to talk a lot about digital data collection training. Platform training is a beast. Okay, I think most clinicians would say, and most people who do ABA training are not completely satisfied with any platform that's out on the market for a variety of reasons. Okay, we hear it all the time. And and aside from their own preferences for it, watching people actually perform with different data collection platforms can really enhance or hamper what they're able to do. Okay. So when it comes to platform training, like I said earlier, we really believe you should start with paper pencil or using clickers like this initially before you get into using the platform. The second is to set up very structured fictional accounts or dummy accounts that have very specific targets in them. They could be targets that you practiced in that upfront pencil paper data collection practice. They could be the same targets, same videos. Now we're going to see how it's oriented within the tablet. We also think that data collection training should be really scripted to call out every single thing that you need to do in the platform. Okay. It's not just, oh yeah, pull up this target. It's on the left side and you figure it out. Now everybody's ready to do data. It is click the hamburger, scroll down, find this target, click on it, close the hamburger, open screen, bring up the bottom of it. That way, more people can facilitate data collection training if you've controlled it through scripted instruction, okay? It also helps you when platforms make updates and you know what you're going to have to train about. You're going to have to change around training. A lot of people, when they update because of the UX of the platform has changed, is that they then have to go and flip out like screenshots of material, or they go and figure out, replace like screencasts of going through the platform. But if you have it written out in a script of the cues that the trainer is going to call, the steps that the trainee needs to take, just like you'd have a task analysis, it can help you a lot in correcting issues about where you have gaps in data collection training. Third bullet here, retry videos that you did with paper data collection. Just because you practice them doesn't mean they need a completely novel example when they get to the platform. Use the platform, use old videos that you've used in paper data collection so that they don't have to attend to 9 variables, they can attend to 4. They're familiar with their video. They kind of remember, oh, that tricky one where one episode ended and the next one started. They can remember that kind of thing. And then you can move to novel examples. Of course, you want to do novel examples. And the last one is auditory training. Now, this one is similar to the visual training that I showed you before, but this is where you're playing a video This is one target that I'm going to focus on, answering questions. You're tracking that at the same time I'm clapping or giving some auditory cue for the secondary target that you're going to track on a clicker or on the tablet, the buttons at the bottom. Okay. So that what starts happening is you're separating, you're changing you're changing the features of the input for the learner so that they're both hearing a clap and they're visually seeing something, and you can train those separately and you can change the complexity of the auditory cue. And then you can move to a novel example where they're going to see both behaviors happening in the video at the same time. Okay. All right. Thanks so much for being here. We hope you'll fill out that form for the clinical leaders community and join us if you're on our mailing list. We just sent out the invite to register for all of the pre-launch events. We can't wait to see you there. Feel free to contact us about a variety of solutions, 40-hour training, ProTech, BCBA, CEUs. We also go out and do discovery projects and custom work with clients where we work on their training systems, their clinical systems, and so forth. And we hope to see you at next month's webinar, where we continue this discussion about training requirements related to content areas and to some strategies you can go and implement with the training that you're using. All right. Thanks so much for being here, everyone.